The first thing my husband placed in my arms after I came home from the military hospital wasn't our long-awaited miracle. It was someone else's baby. And not just anyone's baby. My sister's. Daniel stood in the front hallway of our house in Fayetteville, North Carolina, smiling like he had been waiting all day to give me good news. Behind him, pink and blue balloons floated against the ceiling. A foil banner from Walmart said, "Welcome home, babies." For one confused second, I thought he had decorated for me. Then Emily stepped out of the living room. My little sister, 29 years old, hair curled, face powdered, wearing my gray cardigan like she belonged there. In her arms was a newborn wrapped in a yellow blanket. Daniel had the other one tucked against his chest. "Rachel," he said with that nervous little laugh he used when he wanted to get ahead of trouble. "Meet Noah and Nora." I looked at him, then at Emily, then at the babies. My suitcase was still beside me. My army duffel was still over my shoulder. In the side pocket was a small white envelope from Walter Reed folded around the ultrasound picture I had carried through 2 airports like it was made of glass. For 10 years, Daniel and I had prayed for a child. We had sat in waiting rooms with old magazines and bad coffee. We had smiled through baby showers and gone quiet on the drive home. We had bought little things and hidden them in drawers. Then, after one more failed round of treatment, I took a temporary assignment near Walter Reed National Military Medical Center outside D.C., where a doctor offered me one last chance. I didn't tell Daniel everything, not because I didn't trust him, or at least that's what I told myself. I wanted to come home with hope in my hands, not another apology in my mouth. And I did. I came home pregnant. But Daniel was standing there with twins. Emily finally whispered, "I'm sorry." That was the part that almost made me laugh. Not because anything was funny, but because sometimes the body reaches for the wrong reaction when the heart can't catch up. Daniel shifted the baby in his arms. "It just happened, Rachel." I looked down at the tiny face against his shoulder. That poor child had nothing to do with any of this. So I handed the baby back gently. "I need a minute," I said. I walked upstairs to our bedroom. The bed was made with the quilt my mother had given us on our 5th anniversary. Emily's makeup bag was on my dresser. That told me everything I needed to know. I packed one suitcase, uniforms, medication, the envelope. My old silver wedding band stayed on the nightstand. Daniel followed me to the stairs. "Rachel, don't do this." I looked at him once. "I'm not doing anything I said. You already did." Then I drove to the Candlewood Suites near Fort Liberty, checked in under my maiden name, and sat on the edge of the bed until the room went dark. By midnight, I had signed the divorce papers without saying a word. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, the way I always had in the Army. For a few seconds lying in that quiet hotel room, I forgot everything. Then I reached across the bed, expecting to feel Daniel beside me. My hand landed on cold sheets. Reality came rushing back. The Candlewood Suites coffee wasn't great, but it was hot. I carried a paper cup out to the parking lot and watched soldiers pulling out toward Fort Liberty while the morning sky turned pale orange. Life kept moving even when yours had fallen apart. Around 8, my phone started buzzing. Daniel. Again. And again. Then Emily. I silenced both numbers. I wasn't ready to hear excuses. Instead, I drove on to Post for a follow-up appointment with one of the military obstetricians who had been monitoring my pregnancy. Dr. Elaine Porter smiled as soon as she saw me. "Welcome home, Lieutenant Colonel Morgan. How's your husband handling the news?" I looked down at my hands. "He doesn't know." Her smile faded. She didn't ask another question. That was one thing I appreciated about military doctors. They learned when silence was kinder than curiosity. The baby's heartbeat filled the examination room. Steady. Strong. For the first time in 24 hours, I smiled. "Looks perfect," Dr. Porter said softly. I whispered, "That's all I needed to hear." Driving back toward Fayetteville, memories kept slipping into my mind without permission. 10 years. 10 years of believing our marriage could survive anything. Daniel and I had married in a little white church outside Raleigh. Back then, he was funny, patient, and full of impossible business ideas. I was already serving in the Army, often gone for weeks at a time, but somehow we made it work. When we started trying for a baby, neither of us imagined it would become the center of our lives. Every month ended the same way. Hope. Waiting. Disappointment. Eventually, people stopped asking when we'd have children. Then they started offering advice. Relax. Take a vacation. It'll happen when you stop trying. I learned to smile politely. Inside, I felt like I was failing. Daniel always squeezed my hand in those moments. "We've got each other," he'd say. I believed him. What I didn't realize was how much of our life had quietly shifted onto my shoulders. My army paycheck covered most of the mortgage. My benefits paid for treatments insurance wouldn't fully cover. When Daniel's landscaping company had a slow season, I picked up the difference without keeping score. Then there was Emily. When she couldn't afford tuition at UNC Pembroke, I wrote the check. When her apartment flooded, she stayed with us for 3 months. When she lost her job during the pandemic, I covered her rent. She used to hug me and say, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Looking back now, that sentence hurt more than anything. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped being my little sister. She had become someone I no longer recognized. By late afternoon, I met with an attorney in downtown Fayetteville. His office overlooked Hay Street. He read through the paperwork quietly before looking at me. "Mrs. Morgan, are you certain?" I nodded. "I've spent enough years trying to save something that only one of us was protecting." He slid the papers toward me. I signed every page with a steady hand. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was simply the first honest decision I'd made in a very long time. As I walked back to my car, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID made me stop. Margaret Collins, Daniel's mother. I stared at her name for several seconds before answering. "Rachel," she said, her voice shaking. "Please tell me this isn't true." I closed my eyes. I wish I could. There was a long silence. Then she whispered something that made my stomach tighten. "I think we need to talk, alone." Margaret Collins had always been the kind of woman who ironed her dish towels. When she asked me to meet her, I already knew where she'd choose. The Cracker Barrel off Interstate 95 in Dunn. It was halfway between Fayetteville and where she lived in Benson, and we'd eaten there after almost every Thanksgiving for the past decade. I arrived a few minutes early. The hostess recognized me. "Morning, Colonel Morgan. Just one today." I forced a smile. "Actually, I'm waiting for someone." Margaret walked in wearing the same navy cardigan she'd owned for years. She looked smaller somehow. Older. The moment she saw me, she hurried across the room and wrapped her arms around me. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I stood there for a second before returning the hug. Not because everything was forgiven, because she sounded genuinely heartbroken. We ordered coffee neither of us planned to drink. For several minutes we talked about nothing. The weather, road construction on Highway 421, a church picnic she'd attended the week before. It felt almost ridiculous. Finally, Margaret folded her hands together. "I saw Daniel last night," I figured. "He told me you left him." "I did." She nodded slowly. "He also told me," she hesitated, "about Emily and the babies." I looked out the window. A retired couple was loading rocking chairs into the back of a pickup truck. Life went on for everyone else. Margaret reached across the table. "I thought you already knew." "I found out when I walked through my own front door." She closed her eyes. "Oh, Rachel." I didn't yell. "I know." "I didn't throw anything." "I know." "I just left." She squeezed my hand. "That's exactly why I'm so ashamed." I frowned. "Ashamed of what?" She looked around to make sure nobody nearby could hear us. Then she lowered her voice. "When Daniel came to my house last night, he acted like you'd simply given up on your marriage." I let out a bitter laugh. "That's one way to describe it. I asked him," she continued carefully, "whether you had told him." "Told him what?" Margaret's face lost what little color it had left. "He doesn't know." I stared at her. "Know what?" She looked terrified now, not confused. Terrified. For nearly a minute she couldn't answer. Instead, she rubbed the edge of her coffee mug over and over. Finally, she whispered, "Rachel, I thought you told him years ago." "Told him what?" She looked directly into my eyes. "The truth." The words hung between us. I felt my pulse quicken. "What truth?" She swallowed hard. "I can't believe you've carried this alone." I leaned closer. "Margaret." She shook her head. "Not here." "Then where?" "My house." She reached into her purse, pulled out a small packet of tissues, and dabbed at her eyes. "I need to show you something." "What?" "A file." I blinked. "What file?" "It's been locked in my desk for almost 9 years. My heart skipped. "What is it?" She looked like someone about to confess a terrible mistake. "When Daniel was 36, he asked me to help organize some insurance paperwork after a surgery." I listened without interrupting. "I found medical records by accident." She paused again. "I wasn't supposed to see them." Neither of us spoke. The waitress quietly refilled our coffee before walking away. Margaret leaned even closer. "I confronted you." I frowned. "You did the Thanksgiving after that." Then I remembered. She'd asked whether I'd considered adoption, whether I had seen another fertility specialist, whether I'd gotten a second opinion. At the time, I'd assumed she blamed me. Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought you were protecting him," she said softly. "I never imagined he'd let you keep protecting him after everything you've done." I felt my chest tighten. Whatever was inside that file, it was about to change everything I thought I knew. Margaret lived in the same white farmhouse she'd shared with her late husband for more than 40 years. The porch swing still creaked when the wind picked up, and the flower beds were as neat as ever. Nothing about the place had changed. I wished I could say the same about my life. She unlocked the front door without saying much. Neither of us spoke as she walked down the hallway and disappeared into her small home office. When she came back, she was holding a faded manila folder. She didn't hand it to me right away. Instead, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, took a deep breath, and said, "Before you open it, I need you to know something." I nodded. "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything." "Oh, yes, I do." Her voice cracked. "For years, I believed you were the reason Daniel and you couldn't have children." I looked down at my hands. "I know. I wasn't cruel about it, but," she sighed, "I asked questions I shouldn't have asked. I gave advice nobody wanted. Looking back, I can hear how unfair I sounded." "You were worried about your son." "I was." She shook her head slowly. "But I was wrong." She slid the folder across the table. "I found these by accident almost 9 years ago." I opened it carefully. Inside were medical records from a fertility clinic in Raleigh. My eyes immediately found Daniel's name. Below it were words I hadn't seen in years: severe male factor infertility. The room was completely silent. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. Margaret watched my face. "You knew." "I was there." Her eyes filled with tears. "You've known this whole time." I nodded. "The doctor told us together." She covered her mouth. "Oh, Rachel." The doctor explained everything. There was treatment we could try, but the chances were very small. "And Daniel?" He was devastated. I remembered that afternoon as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. Daniel had sat in the parking lot for nearly an hour, staring through the windshield. He kept saying the same thing. "I'm less of a man." I had reached across the center console and taken his hand. "No," I'd told him, "you're still my husband." That night, I made him a promise. I'll never tell anyone. And I hadn't. Not my parents. Not my closest friend. Not even my commanding officer, who once asked whether I needed more time off for fertility treatments. I simply smiled and let everyone assume the problem was mine. Margaret whispered, "Why would you do that?" "Because I loved him." The answer came out so naturally that it startled me. "Loved. Past tense." She stared at me for several seconds before shaking her head. "Rachel, he let you carry all that blame." "I didn't think of it that way." "But he knew." "Yes, and every time someone looked at you with pity..." I closed my eyes. He stayed quiet. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, I reached into my purse and pulled out the white envelope I'd been carrying since leaving Walter Reed. "I haven't shown anyone this." Margaret looked confused. "What is it?" I opened the envelope and laid the ultrasound photo on the table. For a moment, she simply stared. Then she looked at me. Her eyes widened. "Rachel." "I'm 12 weeks." She gasped and covered her mouth with both hands. "No." "The treatment worked." She began crying before I finished the sentence. "Oh, sweetheart." She came around the table and wrapped her arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I was going to surprise him," I whispered. "I bought little baby boots at the PX. I practiced what I was going to say on the flight home." Margaret held my shoulders and looked me straight in the eye. "He has no idea what he threw away." I swallowed hard. "No, he doesn't." Outside, I heard tires crunch across the gravel driveway. A car door slammed. Margaret looked toward the window. Her face drained of color. "Oh no." I stood. "Who's here?" She didn't answer. Then, Daniel's voice echoed from the front porch. "Mom, I know Rachel's here." For a second, neither of us moved. Margaret looked at me then toward the front door. "Please," she whispered, "don't leave through the back. You shouldn't have to hide in your own life." I wasn't hiding. I was deciding whether this conversation was worth having. Daniel knocked again. "Mom, I know Rachel's car is here." Margaret took a slow breath before opening the door. Daniel stepped inside carrying a grocery bag. He froze the instant he saw me standing beside the kitchen table. His eyes immediately landed on the ultrasound photo. "What's that?" Without thinking, I slipped it back into the envelope. "Nothing you need to worry about." He looked tired, There were dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. "I've been calling you." "I know." "You blocked Emily." "Yes." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Can we please talk?" "I don't think there's much left to say." "There is." He looked at his mother. "Mom, could you give us a minute?" Margaret didn't move. "No." He frowned. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean exactly what I said." Daniel looked surprised. His mother had never spoken to him that way. He turned back to me. "Rachel, I messed up." I almost smiled. Messed up. As if he'd forgotten an anniversary or backed the truck into the mailbox. "You had children with my sister." His shoulders sagged. "It wasn't planned." I wasn't asking whether it was planned. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he said quietly, "Emily needed me." I stared at him. And apparently I didn't. His face tightened. "You were gone." "I was at Walter Reed." "I know." "I called every night." "I know." "I mailed birthday gifts to your mother." "I know." "So don't tell me I disappeared." The room fell silent. Margaret finally spoke. "Daniel." "What?" "Sit down." He looked at her, confused. "I'd rather stand." "No." Her voice was calm but firm. "Sit." Something in her tone made him obey. He pulled out a chair and lowered himself into it. Margaret remained standing. "I've spent 20 years protecting you," she said. "Today I'm done." He blinked. "What are you talking about?" She looked toward me. "Rachel has carried a burden that belonged to you." I immediately shook my head. "Margaret?" "No." She squeezed my hand. "You've been silent long enough." Daniel frowned. "What burden?" His mother looked directly at him. "The one you've allowed everyone to blame Rachel for." He laughed nervously. "I don't know what you're talking about." She walked into her office and returned with the old medical folder. When she placed it on the table, Daniel's expression changed instantly. Color drained from his face. "Mom, you remember this?" He didn't touch it. "I told you never to keep that." "I didn't." "I burned my copy." "I know." He looked at me. "You showed her?" I quietly answered. "No." His eyebrows pulled together. "Then how?" Margaret interrupted him. "I found it years ago." Nobody spoke. Finally, Daniel whispered, "You weren't supposed to see that." "I wasn't." He slowly reached for the folder but stopped halfway, almost as if he already knew there was no point. Then he looked at me. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "You never told anyone?" I shook my head. "Not a single person." His eyes filled with tears. For the first time since I'd walked into that house and seen those twins, I saw genuine shame. He covered his face with both hands. "Oh, God!" He wasn't crying because he'd lost me. He was crying because he had just realized exactly what I'd spent 10 years protecting, and what he'd thrown away. Daniel left his mother's house without another word. He picked up the folder, walked out the front door, and drove away so fast the gravel sprayed across the driveway. Neither Margaret nor I tried to stop him. She stood beside the kitchen window for a long moment. "I've never seen him look that broken," she said quietly. I slipped the ultrasound back into my purse. "I have." She turned toward me. "The day the doctor gave us his diagnosis." Margaret lowered her eyes. "I wish I'd known." "So do I." I hugged her before leaving. She held on a little longer than usual. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "you're family to me." Those words stayed with me all the way back to Fayetteville. The next week settled into an unexpected routine. Every Tuesday morning, I drove to Womack Army Medical Center at Fort Liberty for prenatal appointments. Every afternoon, I met with my attorney, David Reynolds, to move the divorce forward. Every evening, I ignored another round of missed calls. Daniel never stopped trying. Sometimes he left voicemails. "Rachel, please just hear me out." Other times he sent texts. "I made the biggest mistake of my life. Please don't do this. We can fix it." I never answered. Some things can't be repaired because they aren't broken. They're finished. About 2 weeks later, David called. "I thought you'd want to know before you heard it somewhere else." "What happened?" Daniel filed a petition asking the court to delay the divorce. I sighed. "On what grounds?" "He claims he needs time to reconcile." I couldn't help letting out a tired laugh. "That's convenient." "He also says you're expecting his child." I froze. "How does he know?" "I'm guessing someone told him." Only 3 people knew. Me, Dr. Porter, Margaret. Margaret would never betray my confidence. Then I remembered. The ultrasound. Daniel had seen the envelope. He must have guessed. David continued. "Rachel is the baby his—" "Yes." "Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain about anything." There was a brief silence. then the court will acknowledge that. It doesn't change your right to seek a divorce. I know, but it may complicate custody discussions after the baby's born. I understand. After we hung up, I sat in my car outside the courthouse for several minutes. I rested one hand on my stomach. So, I whispered, your dad finally figured it out? The baby answered with nothing more than silence. But somehow that silence felt peaceful. Daniel's world, on the other hand, was getting louder. News traveled fast in a small community. His landscaping business had already been struggling before all this. Now longtime customers quietly canceled contracts. Not because of gossip alone. Because Daniel had stopped showing up. One afternoon I drove past one of his job sites by accident. His truck was there. He wasn't working. He was sitting alone on the tailgate staring at the ground. For a split second I almost pulled over. 10 years of loving someone doesn't disappear overnight. Part of me still wanted to ask if he'd eaten, if he was sleeping, if he was okay. Then I remembered Emily standing in my living room with those babies. I kept driving. Compassion didn't require me to return to a life that had already ended. 3 days later, Margaret called again. Her voice sounded strained. Rachel, what's wrong? I think you should know. I tightened my grip on the phone. Know what? Daniel ordered a DNA test. My heart skipped. For the twins? Yes. She took a shaky breath. And Emily is refusing to sign the paperwork. For the first time since I had walked out of my marriage, I realized the story wasn't over. It was only beginning. I didn't sleep much after Margaret's phone call. Emily refusing a DNA test didn't automatically mean anything. There were legal reasons, personal reasons. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she wanted to protect her children from becoming part of a courtroom fight. But deep down I knew something had shifted. Daniel knew it too. The next Monday I had another appointment with Dr. Porter at Womack Army Medical Center. The baby's heartbeat was still strong. My blood pressure looked good. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to think about nursery colors instead of divorce filings. As I walked out of the clinic, my phone rang. It was Daniel. For reasons I still can't fully explain, I answered. Rachel. His voice sounded exhausted. I only have a minute. I need to ask you something. What? He took a shaky breath. Did you ever know something was wrong with me? I leaned against a brick wall outside the clinic. You'll have to be more specific. The infertility. There it was. After 10 years, he had finally said the word himself. Yes, I answered quietly. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because you asked me not to. A long silence followed. I don't even remember asking. You were sitting in the parking lot outside the clinic. You said you couldn't bear for anyone to look at you differently. His breathing caught. I remember. You cried for almost an hour. I remember. You thought I'd leave you. Another pause. And you didn't. No. He laughed bitterly. I guess I should have been more worried about whether I'd deserve you. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, the DNA test came back. I closed my eyes. I see. They're not mine. His voice cracked on the last word. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. Mostly I felt tired. So Emily lied. She admitted she'd been seeing someone else around the same time. He swallowed hard. She wasn't sure who the father was. I looked across the parking lot where a young soldier was helping his wife load groceries into the trunk of their SUV. Ordinary people. Ordinary lives. It suddenly felt like the most beautiful thing in the world. Daniel continued. I threw away my marriage. He couldn't finish the sentence. I know. I kept telling myself I was helping Emily, that she'd made a mistake and needed someone to stand by her. And now I realized she wasn't the only one making mistakes. I let those words settle between us. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. That's good. But I wanted you to hear it from me before someone else told you. I appreciate that. Rachel, yes. I'm sorry. This time it didn't sound rehearsed. It didn't sound like he was trying to save himself. It sounded like a man who had finally stopped lying to himself. But apologies don't rewind time. They don't erase empty bedrooms, broken vows, or years of misplaced trust. I hope someday you forgive yourself, I said. Because I can't do that for you. I ended the call before either of us could say anything else. That afternoon, local gossip spread faster than summer thunderstorms. Emily had moved out of the house she'd shared with Daniel. The twins had gone with her. Daniel was alone. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction. Freedom. There was no one left to compete with. No one left to expose. The truth had done all the work on its own. 3 weeks later, I walked into the Cumberland County Courthouse wearing my Army service uniform. Not because I wanted to make a statement, because I had come straight from Fort Liberty after an early staff meeting, and there wasn't time to change. Still, I could feel people looking. An older veteran near the security checkpoint nodded politely. "Morning, Colonel." "Morning." My attorney, David Reynolds, was waiting outside courtroom 3B with a folder tucked under one arm. "You doing okay?" "I've been through deployment briefings with less paperwork," I joked. He laughed. "Good. Keep that sense of humor." "I'll try." When we walked inside, Daniel was already there. He looked thinner than I remembered. His suit hung loosely on his shoulders, and there were deep lines beneath his eyes. For a moment I saw the man I had married 10 years ago instead of the one who had shattered our life together. He stood as I entered. "Rachel?" I nodded politely. "Nothing more. The judge called everyone forward. Since there were no disputes over property anymore, the hearing was expected to be brief. Months earlier, Daniel had finally admitted something that surprised even my attorney. The house belonged to me. Not emotionally. Financially. Every mortgage payment, every property tax bill, every major repair had come from my Army income. When David presented the bank records, Daniel didn't argue. "I won't fight her over the house," he said quietly. "She earned it." The judge simply nodded and continued. Then Daniel did something no one expected. He asked permission to speak. The judge hesitated before allowing it. Daniel turned toward me. Not toward the judge. Not toward the attorneys. Toward me. I've spent weeks thinking about what I wanted to say. His voice was steady, but barely. I kept looking for someone else to blame. He glanced at the floor. "Emily, my business." "The stress. Even the Army for sending you away." A few people shifted in their seats. I finally realized none of those things made my choices. He swallowed. I did. The courtroom remained completely silent. I betrayed the one person who stood beside me when I couldn't even stand beside myself. I felt my throat tighten. I let Rachel carry my shame for 10 years. He looked at me. And I repaid her by destroying the only family we ever had. No one spoke. Not even the judge. Then the courtroom doors opened quietly. Margaret stepped inside. She hadn't planned to testify, but she walked straight to the front anyway. "Your Honor," she said softly, "may I say one thing?" The judge nodded. Margaret looked around the courtroom before settling her eyes on Daniel. "My son isn't a bad man." She paused. "But he became a selfish one." Daniel lowered his head. She turned toward me. "For 10 years, Rachel protected his deepest secret." Her voice trembled. "She let people believe she was the reason they couldn't have children." Several people exchanged surprised looks. She never complained. Never defended herself. Never humiliated my son. Margaret wiped away a tear. She loved him more faithfully than he ever deserved. I hadn't asked her to say any of that. In fact, part of me wished she hadn't. Not because it wasn't true. Because hearing someone else say it out loud somehow made the last 10 years feel real. The judge quietly closed the file. After reviewing the final documents, he signed the decree. "I hereby dissolve this marriage." Just like that, 10 years together ended with the scratch of a pen. As everyone began gathering their belongings, Daniel stopped beside me. "I don't expect forgiveness." I looked at him calmly. "You already have the only thing I was ever willing to give." He frowned. "What?" "The truth." Then I walked out of the courthouse into the warm North Carolina afternoon feeling lighter than I had in years. People imagine that after a divorce is finalized, life suddenly feels lighter. That wasn't true for me. Relief came in small pieces. The first morning I woke up without checking whether Daniel had texted. The first grocery trip where I didn't automatically reach for his favorite coffee. The first Friday night I realized I could choose what to watch without anyone complaining that it was too slow. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. And somehow that made it real. A month after the divorce, I moved into a modest 3-bedroom house just outside Fort Liberty. It wasn't fancy, but it had a quiet backyard with 2 maple trees and a front porch just big enough for a rocking chair. When the realtor handed me the keys, she smiled. "Congratulations," I smiled back. "For what?" "Your fresh start." I hadn't thought of it that way. But she was right. Work helped more than I expected. The Army had always given me structure, even when my personal life felt like it was falling apart. Every morning started the same. Physical training, staff briefing, paperwork, meetings. By lunchtime, I wasn't thinking about divorce. I was thinking about training schedules and logistics. One afternoon after a meeting, Sergeant First Class Maria Jenkins caught up with me in the hallway. "Ma'am." "Yes, Maria." She hesitated. I just wanted to say we're all really happy for you. I laughed. I got divorced. I know. She grinned. But you're smiling again. I hadn't realized I was. At 26 weeks, my pregnancy was progressing beautifully. Dr. Porter couldn't stop smiling during my appointments. This little one is keeping perfect time, she said after listening to the heartbeat. You've had enough stress to last a lifetime. I'd rather not test that theory. She laughed. So would I. Before I left, she handed me a printed ultrasound. Take this home. I looked at the tiny profile. So much has changed. Maybe that's exactly why this baby came now. I carried that picture in my purse all day. Not because I needed proof. Because it reminded me that life still had surprises worth believing in. A week later, my office held a baby shower during lunch. I almost talked them out of it. We're soldiers, I protested. We don't do baby showers. Captain Lewis laughed. Ma'am, half this office has grandchildren. Someone had ordered barbecue from Mission BBQ. There was banana pudding sweet tea and a sheet cake decorated with tiny baby footprints. The gifts weren't expensive. A hand-knitted blanket, children's books, a diaper bag. One lieutenant gave me a tiny camouflage onesie that made everyone laugh. Across the room, I noticed Maria wiping away a tear. What? She smiled. I've worked for you 6 years. And I've never seen you let people take care of you. That stayed with me. For most of my adult life, I'd been the one writing the checks, helping my sister, supporting my husband, solving everyone's problems. I had forgotten something important. Strong people need kindness too. Margaret visited me every Sunday afternoon. Sometimes she brought homemade peach cobbler. Sometimes she'd bring baby clothes she'd found at little antique shops. One afternoon, she placed a small wooden rocking horse on my dining room table. My father made this, she said. It belonged to Daniel. I looked up. You should keep it. She gently shook her head. No, her voice was soft. It belongs with someone who still has a chance to build happy memories. Neither of us mentioned Daniel. We didn't need to. Some conversations were finished without words. As she was leaving, she hugged me tightly. I lost a daughter-in-law, she whispered. But I hope I never lose you. I smiled through tears. You won't. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was looking forward to what was still waiting for me. My daughter arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning in early October. The nurses at Womack Army Medical Center joked that she'd picked the only day on my calendar without meetings. After everything I'd been through, labor wasn't nearly as frightening as I'd imagined. Maybe life had already taught me the difference between pain and fear. Pain eventually passes. Fear stays until you face it. When I finally heard my baby cry, the whole room seemed to stop. A nurse placed her gently on my chest. She was tiny, warm, perfect. I counted her fingers twice before I laughed at myself. She's beautiful, Dr. Porter said with a smile. I know, I whispered, tears slipping down my face. I just want to keep looking at her. For 10 years I had imagined this moment. Nothing I imagined came close. The hospital room stayed surprisingly peaceful. A few friends from Fort Liberty stopped by after work carrying flowers, balloons, and far too many stuffed animals. Captain Lewis peeked into the bassinet. So this is the little girl who's been distracting our commanding officer. I laughed. She's already better at getting people to follow orders than I am. Everyone chuckled. For the first time in a very long while, the laughter around me didn't feel forced. It felt like home. Later that afternoon, there was another knock at the door. Margaret stepped inside carrying a small quilt folded carefully over her arm. She looked nervous. I wasn't sure if you'd want visitors. I was hoping you'd come. Her eyes filled immediately. She walked over slowly and looked down at the baby sleeping peacefully. Oh, Rachel. Would you like to hold her? She looked stunned. Are you sure? I nodded. Margaret lifted my daughter with hands that trembled just a little. She smiled through tears. She's perfect. I think so too. After a long silence, Margaret looked at me. I owe you one more apology. You really don't. I do. She swallowed. I spent years asking when you'd give me grandchildren. I reached over and gently touched her arm. You loved your son. I should have loved you better too. I smiled. You came when it mattered. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then she carefully handed the baby back to me. Before leaving, she placed the handmade quilt over my daughter's tiny legs. My mother sewed this almost 50 years ago, she said softly. I've been saving it. I'll take good care of it. I know you will. She kissed my forehead before quietly leaving the room. A few weeks later, I received one final letter from Daniel. Not an email, not a text message, an actual handwritten letter. He didn't ask me to come back. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply thanked me for protecting his dignity when he hadn't protected my heart. He wrote that he had sold his business and started counseling. He hoped one day he would become someone worthy of the grace I'd once shown him. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not because I wanted to remember the past, because I no longer needed to carry it. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with peace. Looking back now, I realize the greatest victory wasn't watching someone else lose everything. It was refusing to let bitterness become the final chapter of my life. I lost the marriage I thought would last forever, but I gained something far more valuable: the freedom to build a future on honesty, self-respect, and hope. If my story reminds you that it's never too late for a new beginning, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take good care of yourself, and if you'd like to hear more heartfelt stories like this, you're always welcome to come back. The end.